Hey everyone, welcome to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. My name is Bryant Francis. We are live right now, so welcome. We are here playing Agents of Mayhem, and we are joined today in the lower left-hand corner by Project Design Director Anoop Shekar. Anoop, can you say hi to everyone?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. And Alex, sorry, normally I let you go first, but you seem to be hiding in the shadows today.
No, this is way better. You should just forget I'm here at all. I actually kind of like um, the guest always going first. So that's way better. Hi, I am Gamasutra editor Alex Waro. It is my pleasure to once again be joined by two informative, insightful, and way more interesting people today. What are we playing, Bryant?
Like I said, we're playing Agents of Mayhem, which is the new game from Volition, the makers of Saints Row. It's kind of a follow-up to Saints Row, I'm told. Anoop, could you kind of clarify where this game came from and why Volition decided to go down this kind of G.I. Joe 80s cartoon road, as we can see from the animation right now?
Yes, yeah. So basically, when we were finishing up Saints Row 4 and then doing Saints Row Get Out of Hell, we're thinking about what are new opportunities. It's, we love Saints Row, and we're not like forgetting about it, but we thought it would be a good opportunity to try something new. And one of the endings for Saints Row Get Out of Hell, Johnny Gat is presented with five choices from God, and one of them is to basically reboot the universe as if the Saints never existed. So Agents of Mayhem is sort of a take on that universe, what it might be like. And we thought like this idea of having this G.I. Joe kind of versus Cobra type of game would be really cool, because we haven't really seen that very often, and definitely not from a single player perspective.
Right on. We were talking before the stream. I'm going to ask my first kind of devy focused question. So obviously, Agents of Mayhem is an open world game. Open world games do require like a lot of broad systems work, sort of before going in and making content. From my understanding, you said before we were talking before the game that you all didn't have as much time to work on the game's opening than you did on Saints Row. I'm curious, just because they're both open world games, what prevented you from putting as much time in, and why, but also why you think that time is important.
Uh, it, so we did spend quite a bit of time on the first mission, but we didn't put necessarily as much effort, or not. We didn't focus on the same kinds of things that we did on a Saints Row game. That's probably the better way to say it.
Yeah.
And that comes from the fact that we were essentially trying to introduce a whole new IP, a whole new set of characters and relationships and concepts. And it's a lot of information to download. And then if you're overly bombastic and crazy, it's very difficult for the players to understand everything they need to understand. Here we're introducing three characters in a row, all their abilities, weapons, and then also like how do you play with them, and what Legion is up to, what you're doing there. And so what we want to do, through a lot of usability testing, we basically learned that this is what we need to do to fully introduce the game. But that in some ways the sacrifice is it not being necessarily as forcefully grabbing as maybe a Saints Row 3 or 4 was.
Gotcha.
Yeah, let's dig into, if you can, for a minute, the core conceit of having a trio of playable characters rather than a single one. I think as we watch Brian play here, we're going to see him flip back and forth between three different, very unique characters with their own sort of abilities and ways of moving through the world. That's not something we've seen you guys do, I think, maybe ever, but certainly not recently. Where did that come from and why?
So when we came up with the idea of like doing this G.I. Joe kind of game, like one of the things about a G.I. Joe type of concept is you have lots of different soldiers or agents who are going around, doing this. So we definitely knew we wanted to have a lot of characters in the game. We've had successful cast of characters in Saints Row in the past. And we actually had initially planned on having like you play as a customizable character like in Saints Row, but when we started doing play testing and figuring things out, everyone's like, I want to play as these other guys because they're so cool and unique. They have these cool abilities. I want to play as those guys. And so we made the decision fairly early on to say, yeah, you're just going to play as these agents. And so we created, for this game, 12 of them, plus we have Johnny Gat and Lazarus as pre-order DLC incentives. The idea is that, yeah, you want to be able to control these guys and in a squad and be able to swap between them on the fly so that you can basically feel like you are controlling this agency.
I don't know if people on the stream just caught that, but when Brian got picked up by his super agency car, he got run over and sort of warped inside of it. And that speaks to something that I think is really strong about this game, which is the characters, the way characters express through art and especially animation. I know maybe you can't speak very in depth to this, but I kind of want to get a sense of what the studio's approach to art and animation and character design was on this game, and how maybe it differed from your past work.
Yeah. So again, we want to make 12 agents that were unique, that were very recognizable, that had very specific personalities and looks to them. So when we were working on the look of the game, we spent a lot of time on the agents themselves in particular. So all of them have unique animations, and they all reflect the personalities of it. So like Fortune is sort of light and limber, so you see that in her movement. Also, she is a little more on the fun side, so when she's kind of not doing normal stuff, you'll see her do something kind of like more lighthearted or fun. Whereas Braddock, who's a former military officer, you'll see her come and stand at attention, which I think is really, really cool, and again conveys who she is as a character. And then in terms of like the actual look of the game, you can obviously tell it's not necessarily realistic, but it uses like a physically based lighting model. So it has like a cool like lighting response to all the surfaces, and we use a lot of the like modern rendering technology, but we put in this sort of stylized cartoon look because we wanted to again reflect those 80s and 90s cartoons that we grew up on, but have it feel modern still.
Sorry, Brian, I kind of stepped over you there earlier. Do you want to squeeze something in?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. So, like, in this game, as I work on shooting down these hell troopers, you talked about, like, having, unique characters with abilities that sync together, but does that kind of create a design question where you're not just making individual characters, every trio of characters, no matter how variant, is sort of like a unique character in itself, because the player, when they swap between this, they're just only swapping a few health bars and abilities. That was just did you guys approach that game that way at all?
Well, we didn't want to make it such that like every combination was paid off specifically, because that would be a lot of work to do and a lot of things to figure out. And so what we did was we wanted to make each agent stand on their own, but have opportunities for benefits to the other agents. So, Fortune can slow enemies down or even stun them. So that makes it easier for then Hardtack to maybe use his harpoon, bring an enemy in close, and take them out. Yeah. And so the idea is we wanted players to mix and match and learn different combinations that work for them and their play styles. And so and that speaks again to our philosophy with the game in terms of customization, which is in Saints Row we had the visual customization for all your characters, and we have some of that in this game, but obviously not nearly to the same level. And so for this game, we wanted the customization to be on the gameplay side. And so that's why you can do a lot of customization in terms of what gadgets and abilities they have, and then make sure that they fit with the other characters that you have in your squad.
Yeah, I have been surprised to see, like, it's been interesting to watch this game come out and see the shift away from a character-centric open world game with a cast to this idea of like a rotating super group. There's a lot to like unpick there. I kind of want to. Well, first before we do that, can we talk about the arc for a second? I don't know if we've seen that on stream yet, but there's like a home base that the character can return to where they do a lot of missions and stuff, and there are NPCs there who you can talk to who have their own interesting sort of character quirks. Like, kind of where did that come from as an idea? I know in the Saints Row games there were HQs you could build, bases you could build, but nothing quite like this. What was your intent with that design?
Again, it was really to reinforce the concept of the agency itself, and the fact that these characters all work together. They have a common goal, a common purpose, and they're a paramilitary organization, and most of those have some kind of base of operations and where that they go to. G.I. Joe has their base, and the Avengers have Stark Tower and all of that kind of stuff. So we wanted to have something that represented that. And then from a gameplay perspective, we needed a place where you could go and swap out your different characters, see what they have, research and build different technologies, test them out in like a rec room, which is like our VR training room, and swap out your vehicles. And so we wanted to have a place that was impressive, that was fun to go back to, and from a pacing perspective, it allows players to sort of get a breather and a break and say, okay, I want to go and take care of some stuff and have a little downtime and sort of reassess where I'm at.
Oh, were you concerned at all about it sort of fragmenting the play experience? Because I said, I only spent a few hours of this game. It's quite colorful and interesting, but going back and forth from the Ark, and sort of whenever you go back to the Ark, there's things to explore, there's things to look at. It kind of pulls you out of Seoul, which is the city that Bryant is running around in. And I found that, after spending a similar amount of time with this game as I might have with the Saints Row game, I don't know the city as well as I would in a Saints Row game, in part because I keep going back and forth to the Ark. So I wonder, was that a concern for you in designing it? And sort of like what trade-offs were you willing to make in order to like give the player this home base area that's sort of separate from the play field?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was something we were concerned about. We didn't want players to be going back and forth in a rate that they were getting frustrated or were like, I'm just going to stop playing because I don't feel like going back there or whatever. But for us, it was important again to reinforce the feeling of the agency. So having a base that you went back to was really important for us. We did a lot of play testing, and we made sure that the times we force you to go back are not so many that you're really feeling like, I've really slowed down or I'm wasting too much time or something like that. And for the most part, most of the Ark visits are when the player feels like it's necessary, whether they want to change their squad out or research or check out the global conflict.
Sorry, Brian, did I step over you there? Go ahead, sorry.
Not really. I was going to pull in from the chat. Waldo Truth would like to know, is there any chance for a PS4 Pro option for 30 FPS locked frame rate in the future? The game is totally playable, they just think it would be a nice option for pro players. Which, I'll just springboard into a dev-focused question. Now that we're in the world of PS4 Pros and Xbox Scorpios and what have you, what all considerations do you have to make for those advanced consoles?
Yeah, so one of the things about I like these sort of partial steps towards the next generation, or it's not a static console, which is kind of cool. The big thing is you can't have the game run on PS4 Pro and not on an old PS4 or Scorpio and not on the original Xbox. So that actually is good in terms of fragmenting the audience or not fragmenting them. But then you still get to be able to take advantage of some of the more cool new rendering technologies or features. For PS4 Pro specifically, we did not go with a locked frame rate because we felt like it was going to be better to actually create more life in the world. So on the PS4 Pro and higher end video cards and Scorpio, you'll actually see more pedestrians and traffic and other kinds of life in the city than you will on the lower end machines and video cards. In terms of like the PS4 Pro and the Xbox Scorpio, for one thing that's cool is it's very similar to upgrading or building features for a higher end video card like a 1080 or something like that, where now we can do a lot of things that the higher end PCs can do, or more of those things on these consoles and make those more comparable experiences.
Yeah, right on. I think one thing that stands out about this game is certainly the clarity of design and graphics and some of this kind of thing. But I think that has nothing to do with what I was going to ask, really, honestly. I was trying to like circle this back around to what I wanted to ask about influences that you can see in the sort of the side games exemplified in the Ark. There's something called, I think, like global conflicts. Please forgive me if I'm wrong, which is sort of like the idea that you send agents you're not currently using in your squad sort of off to do remote missions. And then, in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe an hour at some point, you can then collect them and get resources from that. It's very akin to, those kind of like idle games that you would see in the background of an Assassin's Creed or something. And then in the design of the actual characters themselves, who have mayhem abilities that are sort of like ultimate charge-up abilities, and they have special abilities, there's a certain like a whiff of MOBA-inspired design. So it feels like this game has taken a lot of cues from other genres and other exemplars of design. I kind of wanted to sort of like pick your brain about that. Like what specific games were you looking at when you sort of designed this game?
Yeah, basically we did look a lot of these sort of character based games. I think Skylanders is actually surprisingly one of our big influences in that regard. Because one of the things, like, so I have kids, and when I was actually playing these even before my kids were born, but we'd sit and play Skylanders games, and one of the things that I always enjoyed doing was, I'd have one guy and he'd be dying, or I wasn't happy with how he was fighting, or like we had like an area where like fire was a more important ability, and it's like, oh, let me just switch my character out and put a new one down. And it's like, oh, I would love to do that, but like in a more adult, more like hardcore game setting. And so that was one of the big influences in terms of the agents and the agent swapping mechanics that we came up with for Agents of Mayhem. We actually even looked at like MOBAs like League of Legends and things like that as well, because one of the keys with those games is you want to learn about the different characters and how they work, but you're always going to sort of gravitate towards a few that are more exciting or better for your play style. And so when we made our 12 agents, we never made it with a sense of like, you're going to love all of these agents. We want to make sure there's enough for anyone to play at least 3 agents and be happy with those guys. And I think MOBAs and have a lot of those kinds of similar design considerations and thought process.
Yeah, I think just on a personal level, there's a really exciting breadth of options there. Like I was talking to Brian for the stream. Like this, 2 or 3 hours into the game, I happen to be going on a mission, and there's a little scene that plays when you leave the Ark that shows whoever 3 people you've picked jumping down a tube, and I realized that none of them were white dudes, and that was weirdly really. I hadn't done that on purpose. I had just picked 3 characters I liked that were new and interesting, and they matched well together. And I realized they had interesting outfits, they had interesting backgrounds, and none of them were just boring white dudes. And it was like a huge. It was surprising how meaningful that was to see as a player. But that's not what I was going to ask about. What I was going to ask about is what was I going to ask about? I was going to ask about the writing. I'm sorry. So in talking about, like, it's so interesting that you were inspired in part by Skylanders and this idea of like having that certain like colorful tone, because this game kind of strikes an interesting balance between like what you might call like the more rambunctious tone of a Saints Row and like the really cheerful kind of cheesy tone of an 80s kids cartoon like a G.I. Joe. Yeah. How did you guys navigate that balance?
It's oftentimes it's a field thing. You'll actually like sort of come up with an idea, start working on it, and then you're trying to find that balance through playing it a lot, listening to feedback, and see what people get. But I think the key for us is, we didn't want to make a game that was just like a parody, right? Hopefully people don't consider this as a parody of that genre or those type of games or those types of cartoons. It sort of makes fun of itself. It makes fun of different things. But in the end, you are there to do a job. You're there to stop Legion, the bad guys in the game, and they're not like, you can make jokes about them, but they actually are scary. They have big plans, and if they're successful, that could be bad news for the world. And so we always want to make sure those stakes are there and understandable, and that you're not doing it just for fun. You're doing it because you got to stop these bad guys. And so that was sort of our approach. Is very similar. We used sort of Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy as sort of a touchstone. Kingsman, another great film, as sort of touchstones for that. Where again they make fun of each other, they make fun of the situation, but in the end they know they have to do a job.
That's gotta be hard though, right? Like we don't see a lot of funny games. I think because comedy is exceptionally hard to do in an interactive piece of entertainment. So like you talk about doing testing on this, doing play testing, getting a sense of what people respond to, what they don't respond to. How do you know when something is funny as a game designer?
I mean, really, when you laugh or when you see other people laugh, that's the biggest thing. And it's interesting because humor is very subjective, and interactively it for sure. But even like TV shows and movies, the same film that you think is funny, your buddy is like, I didn't really care for it, right? And it's just one of those really subjective things that it's hard to get consensus on. And in some ways I think you see that reflected in the reviews for our game, which are the people who enjoy the humor, they tend to rate the game very high, and those who don't, unfortunately they give the game a lower score.
Yeah, I mean that's something we can dig into just as you know as a way of doing business. I mean, you've been at Volition for quite a while, and Volition has a track record of producing character like games with character. Let's say like maybe games that have strong writing, strong themes, strong angles, and I imagine those games like this one tend to be very dependent, like more dependent on than most on like a player's tastes, right?
Yes.
I mean, like there's more to these games than just what you do when you press the buttons. It's the writing, it's the scripting, it's the stories they tell. So how do you navigate that, knowing that you need to lead this team to produce a game that does well enough that everyone still has jobs at the end, but also you want to make something that matches a very specific tone and vision?
Obviously, we want to be commercially successful. We want to reach as many audiences members as possible.
Yeah.
But in the end, I feel like if you do something that's just kind of watered down, that's designed to appeal to everybody without question, it's gonna, in the end, you'll get people who like it, but they're not going to care about it. They're not going to love it. And so I'd rather make something that's more polarizing, but that the people who get it and who play it are super attached to it, and they tell their friends and they get them to play it, rather than this is we made this game for critical acclaim or for what we think the entire audience is going to like.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
I mean, I think it's absolutely, and I think it's a tricky question for any developer to answer. So
and if everybody could answer that question perfectly, like they would just be making money all the time, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna ask though. Saints Row. So Saints Row came out in I feel like there's Saints Row, Crackdown. There's a bunch of games that were sort of responding to the Grand Theft Auto 3 and 4, and then it was really cool to watch Volition and the Saints Row series sort of find their own voice and work their way over towards Agents of Mayhem. But along with that transition, everything in the game industry has changed since then. Early access, Kickstarter, the way other game series like Fallout or Grand Theft Auto is an online game now as much as it's a single player game. How do you feel you watch things change? You all knew how to make games one way. This decision obviously would have been made a few years ago / over the last few years, but how did you all sort of adapt to these changes? Because there was a moment where Saints Row was sort of one of the big dogs, and then all the variables that built it just sort of went in different directions.
Yeah, it's sort of the big question we ask all the time, every day, essentially.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what we try to do is, I think we got a lot of success in Saints Row when we didn't try to compete directly with another franchise or everybody else in the genre. We sort of went another way. So Saints Row 3 and 4 in particular, we said let's double down on the comedy, the humor elements, the tone, and sort of the craziness, and we've found a lot of success that way. And because not a lot of other people, particularly in the open world genre, were approaching it that way. And so for us, we want to take some of the trends. We want to look at what other people are doing that's successful. But we can't do all of those things. So let's focus on what we do well and what we think is going to be successful given our skill set and our technology.
Brian, how you doing in there?
Good. Just taking a shortcut.
Yeah. I am sort of
enjoying the loot. Oh my god, did I just do this? All right.
The cool thing is you can just go out and summon it back over.
Yeah, I could, or I could deal with the. Oh shoot, that's really far away, isn't it? I'm gonna need a car. Dang it. Okay, you know what? No, we're gonna role play. I want that bus.
Call the car.
I want that bus. I don't want that bus. I want that. Here, civilian. I need your car. Sorry. We have insurance. Oh my god. Sorry. I was just getting into the moment. I'm going to ask. Well, okay. Let's do it. Let's ask about ludonarrative dissonance. Because, no. Okay. Well, okay. I don't think that term is necessarily the best word that applies here, but we'll use that as the broad term to ask about. It is a superhero game. It's a hero game. You obviously your company's tech and your design history comes from these mayhem-y criminal games where damage to the open world doesn't matter. But you can do a lot of damage to the open world in this game. How did that sort of can you walk us through the decision of letting players still basically steal cars, crash cars, run over civilians? Like, it's kind of a line where it's obviously fun. Maybe a better way, because lunar narrative dissonance is not. It's a phrase I think should be applied more. Like tactically, I think maybe the reference here is to playism versus simulationism. If you get my drift.
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
Alex is making fun of me.
So one of the things, Saints Row games, you're ostensibly the leader of a gang, and so when you do things that hurt the city or the civilian populace, even though you're essentially trying to save the city from worse people, you kind of get it. You're okay with that.
Yeah.
And so for Agents of Mayhem, we actually sort of wanted to lean into that, and that's why the game is called Agents of Mayhem, right? It's because we don't want you to feel like, oh, you're there to save people specifically. You're there to stop Legion. That's the goal of Mayhem as an organization, is they're there to stop Legion, and that means doing whatever it takes to make that happen. And as a player, that you're essentially given the license to harass or destroy the populace or the city as necessary to make that happen. And different players are going to take that to different levels, based on their play styles or how they feel about things.
That brings up something that has kind of been on the back of my mind for a while, which is like this game, unlike Volition's other recent work, takes place in a real location. I mean, like if I remember right, Saints Row, when it wasn't taking place in simulation or in hell, was in fake cities, right? It was in like
those real places, right? So
yeah. But like this is Seoul. I mean, this is Seoul in a future. This is a made up future Seoul, but it is a real city in the world. So I kind of want to wonder, like, why did you take that direction when this game has such an interesting balance between sort of like kind, polite realism and over the top kind of manic violence, and in both like tone and both actions the player can take, and in the actual like design of the real world. So like, for example, like why put this in Seoul, and how did you guys go about designing this future Seoul?
So we decided fairly early on with Agents of Mayhem that we were going to actually utilize real cities, because one of the features of the concept of this type of genre, this type of game, is what I would describe as globe hopping, which is you're going around the world stopping Legion wherever they are, whatever they're trying to do. This game is focused in Seoul specifically, but that's part of why we put the global conflict system in there, is because we wanted people to understand, like, no, Legion's operating all around the world, and so is Mayhem, because they're trying to stop them. So in order to help ground that reality, we felt like using real cities was important. We picked Seoul in particular because we wanted to do something that you don't really see that often in big AAA games, and then we also wanted to match more of the story of this game, which is you're fighting against the Ministry of Pride, and they're very robotic, AI, technologically focused, and Seoul is sort of at the forefront of that here, in our world, and we want to take that sort of one or two steps further with the world of Agents of Mayhem, and so we don't have the one-to-one recreation of Seoul here. It's not like, oh, I've been on that block in Seoul. We wanted to use elements inspired from that, but it's been rebuilt in the sort of new futuristic venue that's sort of promising of the future, and that's where the look of the city comes from. That's why you see all this sort of high tech, these robots that are patrolling around. The various signage is very like hologrammy and stuff like that. We wanted to basically say, like, yeah, they were attacked on Devil's Night by Legion, the bad guys, but they're moving to the future. They don't want to remember that. They want to think about what's coming in the future.
Right on.
Then my next city-related question is, I once watched the post-mortem for Sunset Overdrive, where I learned, basically it was like a really good breakdown of how they built their city and how they like had to kind of scrap their city and build it 3 times after they realized their traversal system was changing. Can you talk about making this game's traversal system and making it so that the players can basically go anywhere, but also figuring out like what heights they would be at, the fact that like, okay, this cluster of buildings they're meant to run around, but at a certain point they need to get back down on the street and get to a car. Like, what's the good flow for designing with that?
Yeah, it's a complex process for sure, but I think it's sort of at a fundamental level, we rebuilt all of our tools and technology for Agents of Mayhem.
Yeah.
And in doing so, one of the key things is we build urban games, we build games in cities. So we wanted a tool set that allowed us to very quickly build cities and blocks and roads and everything like that. So that's something you can, like, at a very fundamental level, not like super polished like you see it here, but we can make city blocks and buildings of different shapes and sizes like extremely fast and very easily, so you can quickly get the shape of a city and the flow and things like that. And so we start by building out different prototypes of cities and blocks and running around, and then here's the different abilities. So we actually started the game with double jump, and we created a metric of like, based on how high our railings are, how high each floor is, the double jump should go this high, and everything should be built knowing that. And so we did that, but it ended up becoming very tight in a lot of places. It's like, oh, I want to get to the top of this thing, but if I don't time my jumps exactly or know exactly where to go, it's just too hard to get on top of it. And it's creating a lot of frustration. In parallel to that, we have gremlin tech, which are sort of these consumable pieces of technology that your R&D specialist gives you. There are a lot of the fun, kind of crazy weapons that you would have seen in previous Saints Row games are there. And one of our designers actually prototyped a gremlin tech that give you triple jump, and he showed it to me and another design director, and we played with it. And we're like, this is great, because you feel the freedom in the city so much more. Like, we should just make this a standard jumping ability now. And in doing so, we actually made the entire flow of the game significantly better. We had received a lot of complaints about people not knowing how to get up things, where to go, and how to complete missions. As soon as we did that, all those complaints, or almost all of them, went away. And the reason I tell the story is because it's not like a X, Y, Z or ABC type of step process. There's a lot of like back and forth and parallel design that actually ends up creating the final product.
Right on. Something that's also been kind of bugging me since we started. We talked about a bit in the beginning about how this is a departure from Saints Row. It's a spin-off, but more than a spin-off. It's in many ways a totally new IP. But what we didn't dig into is why that was valuable to you as a person and a game maker. So many studios make a business out of producing game after game after game in the same franchise, the same genre. Why take a departure? I mean, the Saints Row series was doing from the exterior quite well, right? Like Saints Row 3 and 4 seemed to be well received. They seemed to do well. Why was it important for you to get away from that series?
It's not so much that we had to get away from it as we wanted to try and stretch our muscles and try doing something different. We'd had success to some degree with Red Faction. Red Faction Guerrilla was a critical success, but unfortunately not a commercial success. And Red Faction Armageddon was even less so, unfortunately. So for us, we're always interested in doing not just one thing, even though it's a very big undertaking. But part of it is, as a player, you get a game every 2 or 3 years from your big game companies. I'll say your Call of Duty when you're getting every year, and you play it for a few weeks at a time, maybe or whatever, particularly on the single player side, and then you're ready for the next one after a year or so. When you're working on a game, on a franchise, you work on a game for 2-3 years at a time, and that's all you're thinking about. That's all you're doing, and then that game finishes, you do DLC or you move on to the sequel. And you're thinking about that stuff again, and after a while, it gets stale for you. And it's not that you don't enjoy that game or anything, but you also you're potentially running out of ideas, or you're forced to sort of rehash the same things over and over again. Mm-hmm. And by doing something different, you get a chance to sort of try different things and say like, oh, you know what, this is cool. And then if you end up going back to that previous series, you can bring some of those things in, or I think as we were talking about before, the state of the industry changes a lot over the course of 5 or even 10 years. And then you think, okay, now if we're coming back to this franchise, if we're coming back to Saints Row or Red Faction, if we had the rights to it, this is how we're going to tackle it now, because there's all these new concepts and ideas out there, new expectations for them, and it sort of rejuvenates those franchises or those IPs.
Yeah, so now we've got you. We've pinned you down on release week. We got to ask, how did it go? I mean, production, yeah.
Yeah, it's still a little early, unfortunately, to tell, but definitely people who are playing the game are really enjoying it. We're getting a lot of positive feedback on the game. People seem to really enjoying the agents and the humor and the game. The agent swapping mechanic in particular. I think people are really once they spend a couple hours with it, they're really understanding. Like, oh, this is different than anything I've really played with in a long time or ever. And And so overall, the fan reaction has been extremely positive, and we're really happy with that.
Right, but I mean, even beyond reception, like you as a team, as a developer, like what did you guys learn from the process of making this? What how has this changed the way you approach game design? And maybe if we can go a bit further, like what didn't quite work out that you were hoping would work out?
So there's a lot of things. We do this thing called what we call a core dump, which is basically the entire team gets together to talk about what went right, what went wrong, and what can be done better going forward. We haven't actually had that meeting yet, but we're compiling all the data. We basically have everybody on the team write up their feelings on it, and then we sort of compile all that information and talk about it at a high level. And then we also have breakout sessions on per area basis. For me personally, I think we were very successful with the agents and their design and how they work together and telling their stories and telling the story of Soul. There are things I would like in terms of I feel like we could have done a little bit more with some of the open world stuff, but I think overall I'm still pretty happy with it. I like the idea of doomsday weapons, which are something that come in after you've pissed off Legion enough. They basically drop in these big weapons that sort of affect the whole area of Soul. But I feel like there's more we could have done with that because we were still trying to figure out what is Legion doing on a regular basis in the city outside of their big plots, and can we have taken advantage of that more?
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I guess it's probably too early to ask this then, since you haven't had your core dump yet. But is there anything you would any advice you would offer to other game developers now this project is in the rear view? Like things that people might be able to apply to their own work that would help them avoid some hassles you ran into during development?
One of the things that sometimes happens, I think probably in any company, but it definitely happens at Volition to some degree, is we had a successful game with Saints Row. We use a lot of elements from Saints Row in Agents of Mayhem, but like you said earlier, it's its own game, and so sometimes there's resistance to creating something new or changing something fundamentally that was successful in a previous game, but is not necessarily the right thing to do in this game. And so just being aware that if you had something successful before and you're trying to do something new, the inherent resistance that comes with that, and not to get you don't want to get angry at those people, but you need to walk them through that process of, well, here's why we're doing this differently. This is something new. It's not something that we've seen before, and it's going to be okay. And if it's not okay, we will reassess. But let's try it first before we say it's not worth doing, or why are you doing this, or what's wrong with what we did before.
Yeah, so I wonder what worked well for you trying to get the word out about what this game is and who should be playing it. Like, did you rely mostly on press and your own marketing, or did you go to YouTubers and streamers? Like, how were you most effectively able to get this game in front of the people you thought would enjoy it?
Yeah, we had a number of press events to show off the game to people, doing interviews and things like that. But yeah, we actually did provide the game to a number of influencers and streamers a few weeks before release, and had them play a few hours of the game at different points, and that I felt was actually a very successful strategy. That people, I think, got a much better sense of the game and what we were making and why it was fun, because they were able to be exposed and see it for themselves, rather than being seeing a few clips or just seeing it written up as I'm trying to describe to you what this game is. And and there are so many different elements from different types of games in here that it's hard to understand how they come together, why they come together, unless you see it in front of you.
Yeah, I'm always curious to hear how devs. I mean, you're certainly not alone. Like that's almost common practice these days. But I'm always curious to hear how devs and teams decide who to put their game in front of. So I wonder, when you guys were looking for outlets to sort of seed the game out there, was it people that you watch, people that you enjoy, or was it people that you thought would be most able to sort of get a wide reach?
That's a question that's actually a little more difficult for me to answer, because that was really handled by our
by a different team.
Our PR team. I think they did sort of go after people that they thought would enjoy the game or respond to it well. It's a little more challenging for me because I'm not a big stream watcher myself. But now watching people play my game, for a number of times, I can see the appeal of it for sure, and now I'm more interested in doing it myself, or seeing people do it, not streaming myself necessarily.
No, I mean for sure. Like we've heard, kind of what I was getting at is we've heard lots of developers who will take the same strategy and then take that opportunity when streamers are playing their game pre-release to kind of like watch and tweak, like kind of do bug fixes, kind of do like usability tweaks as they see people getting to play their game live. But
yeah, I think we were a little bit past that point, though. I think we are definitely. I mean, we're continuing to work on things for potential patches in the future and stuff like that. But overall, what we actually respond more to is like, are they picking up the things that we think are important, or do they, what are they frustrated by? Are these things that we can be thinking about in the future, or for games that we're making, the next games that we're making, or whatever.
Something I also want to follow up on that is back from the beginning has having kids changed the way you make games at all?
I just have less time to spend on them, I guess. Right. No, I mean, no. I'm going to say really not. It made me more patient. That's the biggest thing with people at the studio or other people, and it's giving me a better perspective in terms of dealing with things that are frustrating, because kids being frustrating for sure. Even though you love them, you're like, oh, just stop. But other than that, no. I actually think it's kind of fun, and my kids were actually asking me. I told them like, oh, our game's coming out Tuesday, and we're excited. She's like, is this a game that we can play? And I said, no, unfortunately. And then trying to explain to them why that's not the case. And it is like, I wish I could show them the game and like get them excited. But they're 7, so that's why they can't see it. But I do look forward to the time when they are old enough and they can experience more of this kind of stuff. Maybe that time they'll be like, yeah, Dad, whatever, I don't care. But it's definitely something I'm looking forward to. Yeah,
no, totally. I mean, actually, usually we hear that having kids makes developers more focused, more like they use their time better because they have less of it. So to hear that
was true. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't often hear that it makes you a better interpersonal communicator at the office, but that's good. That's good to hear. Also, I must have misunderstood. I thought when we were talking earlier, I got the impression that you had become a father during development, but you're. No. Right, okay, all right.
Yeah,
I was like,
no. No, they're 7, so yeah, they've been born for a few years by the time we started this game.
All right, that's totally my bad. Sorry about that, Brian. I've been meandering off too long. Do you want to squeeze in some hot design questions here that you've been sitting on?
Waldo Truth says Red Faction Guerrilla is the gold standard of destructibility. I'm kind of curious. This game isn't as destructible as that game, but what is good destructibility?
That's a great question. It's one that we spend a lot of time trying to answer. I think with Red Faction and Guerrilla in particular, I think we your user says, this was sort of the pinnacle for us. And I think what made it successful was we created essentially a playground and gave the player a lot of tools to play in that playground, and said, okay, there's a bunch of stuff you have to destroy. You figure out how you want to do it, and just go. And because if we create design that's very based on like, oh, you have to destroy this thing in this particular way or in this order or whatever, then you lose the benefit of that technology and that idea, because the whole thing should be, I have no idea what's going to happen, or I want to see what's going to happen when I destroy this thing in this particular way.
Sorry, I just laughed at his line.
And anytime you constrain that, every time you make it more difficult for the player to do that, it loses a lot of the magic and feeling from it. And so I think, if we ever went back to that destructive technology, I would spend a lot more time trying to understand what is the best way to make that playground aspect as compelling as possible while still making it engaging for the player, that drives them forward, that they want to destroy these things, that there's a reason for it and it makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder also, in watching Bryant sort of wrap up that, I don't know what you would call that. It's not really it's kind of like a boss encounter, but maybe it's not.
It was
like
a boss battle.
We call it boss cameo, because you'll have your final battle against Hammersmith a little bit later on, but we always want to sort of introduce them and show them the level of threat and give them sort of a face before you finally confront them.
I will say, out of all the boss battles I played in games lately, that was the one that felt most like a focused boss battle. Like, I feel like sometimes lately I've been playing against a lot of bosses that are just damage hogs, and there isn't, like, a particular, like... I think back to World of Warcraft, which did a really good job saying, this is the method for beating this boss. You will not do it right the first time. You have to practice it.
Yes.
And that's what I feel like happened there on a smaller scale. Like, it wasn't just a normal, clear this larger horde of enemies. It was, you have to dodge this blast and get the right timing.
Yeah.
So that was just a compliment, not a question.
Man,
Yes.
bosses are weird though, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is the what? This is maybe a
why
this is
bosses?
this is a deceptively foolish question, but like, or maybe not deceptively. It's an earnestly foolish question, but like, why? Why did you guys stop to consider what is important about these kind of cameo boss fights and actual boss fights, and why they matter to the game's core design?
Yeah, we spent quite a bit of time on that, and there was some internal debate about like is this worth the time and effort to put into it, and because boss battles are expensive. That's just like if you ask any developer, and they'll say like that is one of the more expensive things you can do, and the reason that it those questions come up with boss battles and why they're not always so as great as people would hope they are is you only see them one time, and so you're spending a lot of time and effort on it, and whereas you could be spending some of that time on general systems or the whole overall city or layout or whatever. But for Agents of Mayhem, we felt like boss battles were extremely important because, and we've probably spent the most time on boss battles in this game than any other game we've done in the past, because you're fighting against these enemies, and the big enemies, the lieutenants, Dr. Babylon, the Minister of Pride, you want to have these big confrontations with them. You want to feel, again, the end of their stories and feel like you're fighting for something specific, and you're going to care about defeating them. And if you didn't have these boss battles, if you were just fighting against these nameless Legion grunts, it would essentially feel like there was no point. And so the boss battles were something that I fought for particularly in this game. And we actually had one of our designers, he created a boss battle system that made it not, I wouldn't say cheap, but cheaper and more consistent to build these in an effective way compared to like what we could say is one-off development systems in the past for boss battles.
Yeah, so like in a sense, they're character building exercises, both like in a systems-based way where the player is gaining experience, but also like a way for the designer to build a relationship with these enemies that are sort of above and beyond. That's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
It's funny because like I read reviews or comments from people like, oh, this boss battle sucked, or why do they make it so crappy or whatever, and I'm like, I know why, and I totally get it, and yeah, it's disappointing, but I can't fault them for it at all.
I think it creates an interesting rhythm too. Maybe we can talk a bit more about that if you're up for it. Like this game to me is defined by its is set apart from for a game like Saints Row by its rhythm, right? Like in Saints Row, I remember, or in most of the world games, I remember you're seamlessly in the world. You're jumping from place to place. Maybe you're fast traveling to missions or certain places, but for the most part, you're in this like slow, steady route through a city. And here, you're kind of like you're making these routes through the city, and then they're interrupted with these staccato fights when you go into enemy bases or you go to a boss fight, and then you sort of take this breather and you pull back to the arc, and it's like this sharp staccato series of very smooth game bits, I guess. So like I wonder when you guys were thinking about, but at the same time, like the movement is so smooth. Like every character has multiple jumps. They have a slide ability or something. So like, how did you guys think about that when you're thinking about how the player moves both through the actual story and through the world? Like, what was important to you about the game's flow?
So fairly early on, we developed a thing called the game loop, which is as you're playing through the game, when these are the things that we expect you to do, the decisions the player will make, and where they will go as they're playing through. And we call it the loop because it's you're repeating it over and over, right? And so very early on, we knew we said like, we want you to come down into the city with your squad. You're going to fight against enemies. You're going to explore. You're going to pick up things. You're going to choose to do a mission or an activity. You do those things, and then you'll do that for a while. And then at a certain point, you'll say, because you've got enough upgrades, or you've gotten enough materials, or you've unlocked a new agent, you say, I'm going to go back to the Ark, and I'm going to change that around. And so the idea is we wanted to sort of create a sense of we want the player to do this many loops in general before they go back to the arc. When they up the arc, we want them to spend not more than this much time, and then with the movement, we wanted to make sure that like when you're in the city, you can quickly get to the places you need to get to, because we don't want you to feel frustrated or slowed down, and then decide like, forget it, I'm just not going to do that thing.
Right.
And even in the arc, we actually designed the arc in a way so that you could take advantage of the jumping, and that's why you're allowed to jump in the arc, because we want you to be able to quickly go to station and not have to, I played tons of Destiny, but like it's much slower in the hub areas than it is when you're out in the world, right? And we wanted to make sure.
I'm curious why you made the decision to make the arc navigable through physical traversal and not just sort of a series of menus. Because really, the arc is unlike the physical world space. I mean, I'm sort of answering my own question with the answer is it's more interesting, but I'm also curious like why you think it's valuable for idle spaces to still be navigable and traversable, even if your sole purpose there is essentially to go from menu to menu to menu.
Yeah, I mean it's a great question, and that was a debate that occurred, as we were developing the game, and ultimately what it comes down to for me is the Mayhem as an organization is itself a character in the game, and it's embodied in a sense by the arc itself. And so what you want to do is you want to see like what does the arc mean to Mayhem? What does it mean to the agents? What does it mean to Persephone, who leads the arc, or who leads Mayhem? And so that's why she has her own office, and it's by far the most grand office, and she has all this art that she's stolen from the other parts of the world. And so just by going in there, you get a sense of like, I know what Persephone is about. I know what she cares about. I know how she sort of operates just based off of her space. Same with the other arc agents. And so the idea is when you go there, you get a sense of this. There's something real here, that this is a real organization that operates and has significant weight and effort behind it. Does that make sense?
It does.
I'm curious what you. I mean, obviously, every time I ask a question like this, I get the answer of, well, it depends on the game. But I'm curious, like, what would you say to other designers to make them think about making spaces like that interactive instead of menu-driven?
Yeah, again, it's going to be a lot of depend on your resources and what's important to the game. But essentially, for us, it's we want. What you want to do is you want to prioritize the things that you think are going to best communicate the experience of this world and these characters to the player. So for us, the arc was important because we wanted players to feel like the agency Mayhem was a real organization that people should care about. If for whatever reason it was like, oh, this is just a guy on their own just doing all this stuff, then it's like, you know what, let's not spend a bunch of time in a base, especially if there's no other people he's talking to or whatever. Let's just make it a bunch of menus, because why waste the time and effort on that when it's just this lone rogue operative who's going and doing these things.
Yeah, I in thinking about the way the player can spend time in the arc and sort of running around, it occurs to me like, and you brought up Destiny, right? Like, a lot of the elements of design that have surfaced in Agents of Mayhem, you can see in other games out there right now that sort of rely upon different business models, right? Like, I'm not saying this is all, like, these ideas and these concepts were birthed in free-to-play and sort of like online multiplayer games or anything like that, but certainly they're very in vogue, right? The idea that like you can send characters off to do a mission that's timed and you get resources for it, and then maybe you could spend a little bit of money or get a resource, and then you could speed that timer up, right? Or maybe you could get an experience double or something like that. All of these things are in Agents of Mayhem in some form or sense, but there's no microtransactions that I've seen. This game is a $60 game sold at retail. So like I kind of want to, like, as we see fewer and fewer full-priced retail video games being sold, like why how did you approach the design of the business model of this game? Why was it important for you to make this a $60 box product, and as far as I can tell, not include any like there are lots of opportunities in here for crates or chests or the keys, but there's none of that in there. Why?
I mean, to be honest, it's something we talked about and we spent some time thinking about it. And, so some of it is technical reasons, some of it is, what we're able to accomplish, and some of it is what we thought our player base would be okay with or how they would respond to it. But, it's, for me, it's not like, oh, we should not have done it, but it's more like, yeah, this is the best decision. And I do know, like, the frustration that players express when, like, oh, you made me buy this $60 game and now you want me to pay extra money for these other things that, you think are going to be cool or not, and why are you making me do that? In the end, and I'm not saying that we're doing these things or anything like that, but the reason those things are done is because they are ultimately successful, right? People complain about them, but that doesn't mean that people aren't buying them, and they may not even be the same people. But so like, if we go back a little ways to not Morrowind, but Skyrim, on Xbox 360, and I believe Horse Armor. I remember the complaints that Bethesda and everybody had to field, and then like what is this or whatever. And my understanding is it sold really well.
It's crazy to think. I think it was Oblivion that had Horse Armor, because then Skyrim had
that's Oblivion. Sorry, you're right.
Yeah,
that's correct.
I mean they're very similar in many ways. They both have horses. I think both of them have Horse Armor, and like it's crazy to think that was such a flashpoint, right, at the time, and now it seems so innocuous and so commonplace.
Right, and so I think with things like loot boxes and things like that, to me, we're at that cusp right now where I think it will be an accepted standard practice in games. It's going to take consumers a while to get used to that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Waldo Truth mournfully says Shadow of Warbucks, referring to the next Shadow of Mordor game.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to go through the horse armor. They're going to be this generation's horse armor version of the loot boxes, right?
If we ever get to interview them, I'm going to ask, what does it feel like to be this generation's horse armor?
I don't know.
I'm looking forward to the game personally, and I may even get some of those loot boxes, but I take them at their word that it's not necessary in order to fully enjoy the game.
Yeah, totally. And like honestly, from an outside perspective, like it's really exciting to watch the game industry evolve to a point where not only are the walls between genres breaking down, the idea that like you have RPG mechanics in open world games, you have mobile mechanics in open world games, you just have game mechanics in games at this point. But like, games don't have to be $60 anymore or $20 or free to play. Like they can be these strange, like every game can be a strange melange of an opening price point or a free price point, and then it can have microtransactions, or it can have ads, or it's just nice to see that there's room in the game industry for things besides $60 or free to play games. And obviously, there's a whole other conversation to have there around indies and pricing and stuff. But we're out of time, so we can't do that.
We're out of time.
Yeah. I will say that I agree. I'm personally excited about all of that stuff. I like having more options, both as a consumer and as a developer. And I think it's just, I think it's very easy for people to get frustrated by, decisions that companies make. But I think, they're trying to do it because they're trying to find what's successful, what's going to work for them, and what's going to be a good experience for the consumer.
Yeah, totally.
Perfect time because I wrapped up this mission. Thank you all for joining us. We have been playing Agents of Mayhem with Anoop Shekar. It is now available on PS4, Xbox One, and your humble personal computer. If you enjoyed this interview, we would appreciate it if you clicked the follow button so that we could bring you more great interviews, roundtables, and other such things from the folks at Gamasutra.com, where we talk about the art and business of making video games. Anoop, is there anything you want to say to everyone before you go?
Just thanks for watching, and I hope you guys, if you pick up the game and you enjoy it, that we'd love to hear about it. We also love to hear if you're frustrated, but definitely we're excited about the game and hope everyone gets a chance to check it out.
Awesome. Alex, anything you need to say?
Well, first, thank you, Bryant. Thank you, Anoop. And sorry to everybody. I got a bad haircut, so I've just been fiddling with that the whole stream.
Just apologize for his haircut.
Yeah.
That's
what I have to say, Brian.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for watching.